Hi, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Reality, an immersive tech series that is brought to you by AMPLIFY and TRANSMIXR. Today, we'll be talking about reimagining realities and how XR and AI are redefining the creative expression. As part of our webinar series, we're also going to have 2 additional episodes, which are going to be on the 6th of November, called Creative Futures, Ethical Frames, Balancing Innovation and Integrity in Emerging Tech. And then also the next one is going to be on the 13th of November, which is going to be called Opportunities Beyond Reality, Exploring the New Creative Frontier. And both of those webinars are going to be starting at the same time as today. So this is 10:30 CET, and make sure to join. Saying all of this, today you're here to talk about how XR and AI are redefining creative expression. So welcome. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording afterwards is going to be made available to you in a message. And also the recording is going to be published on both of AMPLIFY and TRANSMIXR's YouTube channels. After the short intro that I just did, we're going to have a little bit more information about the 2 different projects, about the 4 amazing panelists that we have today. Then we'll move on to the panel discussion, which is going to be around 40 minutes. And then we'll focus on a Q&A. And we'll try to have this wrapped up by 12 CET so that we take in consideration all of your time. Please make sure that you add any questions that you have for our panelists in the chat down below. Today, your hosts will be myself and my colleague Ivana. We're both from F6S, and my name is Alina. I'm presenting AMPLIFY, and Ivana is going to be presenting TRANSMIXR. Ivana, do you want to say hi to our audience?
So hi everyone, thank you Elena. I'm Ivana and communication manager at F6S and part of the TRANSMIXR project. I'll be co-moderating this session today, so back to you Elena.
Thank you, Ivana. So saying that I'm from AMPLIFY, meet AMPLIFY. AMPLIFY is a pioneering Horizon Europe project that is dedicated to driving the sustainable and inclusive digital transformation of the culture and creative industries. AMPLIFY unites artists, researchers, and technologists from 8 European countries to create innovative and, most importantly, human-centered solutions. AMPLIFY is leveraging advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and extended reality, which are the technologies that we'll be discussing today. And it will develop the AMPLIFY Portable and the AMPLIFY Immersive, which will aim to offer artists in the culture and creative sector free resources to explore physical and digital interface, which is also known as phygital experiences. Those tools will foster the collaboration and connection between creators, audiences in new and innovative formats. Our speakers from the AMPLIFY side today are Dr. Mikel Zorrilla, who's also AMPLIFY project coordinator. He's a distinguished academic background and holds a telecommunications engineering degree, an advanced degree in computer science, and he's also done a PhD on interoperable technologies for multi-device media services. Dr. Zorrilla is also the director of Digital Media and Communications Department at Vicomtech and has led and participated in several national and international research and innovation projects, one of them being Traction, which is a Horizon 2020 project where opera co-creation has been explored as a path of social and cultural inclusion. Then on the other hand, from the AMPLIFY side, we also have François Matarasso, who's joining us to share his expertise on the social and artistic front. François is a highly respected community artist, writer, and researcher. He's also a very big part of AMPLIFY and has previously worked on Traction with Mikel. He brings years of experience working with cultural bodies in over 40 countries, ensuring that technology and co-creation remain focused on achieving genuine social and cultural inclusion. François has established influential concepts and cultural policy with his 1997 report called Use or Ornament, the Social Impact of Participation in the Arts, which has been widely published and translated in a variety of languages. His latest book is called A Restless Art, How Participation Won and Why It Matters, which was published in 2019. He's also the co-host of a podcast called A Culture of Possibilities, and is also working on a project which is going to be called A Selfless Art. Welcome both. Do you want to, maybe I missed something. Do you want to say something? Present yourself to the audience, present Amplify?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Elena. I don't really have anything else to add about myself. I think you did a great job. And I just wanted to emphasize that Amplify, we are close to the first year of the project, and it's a 3-year project. So we have 2 years in front of us, and we are now facing all the design, human-centric methodological part, and so on, and facing all the first iteration towards the first implementation of the technologies, the evaluation with the cultural and creative industries stakeholders, and so on. And then the second half of the project, so the latest 18th month of the project, we will be doing a second iteration with everything that we learned and expecting to reach the impact that we are expecting for cultural and creative industries.
Thank you, Mikel. François.
Thank you, Elena, and good morning to you and to everyone. I think Mikel has given a good overview of where we are with Amplify. I think for me, I come from a non-technological background. It's been a very interesting journey, both with Traction and with Amplify, to learn about how technology can enhance and also influence the way in which we work in the cultural and creative industry. So I'm looking forward to discussing that this morning.
Thank you, François. And I give the floor to Ivana, who's going to present you TRANSMIXR.
Thank you. So this is great. Now let's take a closer look at the TRANSMIXR project. So TRANSMIXR is reimagining the media landscape by using AI and XR technologies to turn audience from passive viewers into active co-creators of media experiences. The project aims to empower the cultural and creative sector by building tools that truly respond to their needs. And TRANSMIXR is developing 4 pilots co-created with users and stakeholders to build real-world creative solutions. So we have some truly creative minds from TRANSMIXR project today with us, Tupac and Alina. So you can proceed with next slide, Elena. In this case, I will hand it over to them to introduce themselves. So maybe Alina or Tupac, whoever wants to start.
I guess I'm happy to start. Yeah, so my name's Alina. I work on the TRANSMIXR project at the National Institute for Sound and Vision, Beeld and Geluid. And I'm many things. I am a UX researcher and a designer, but I'm also an artist myself. So I also work on multidisciplinary and kind of multisensory art. So I think of technology from different perspectives. Looking at multisensory experiences in VR. Yeah, and then I guess I've worked in more government sectors. I was at Disney Research for a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you, Alina. And Tupac?
I go by the fact that I am an internet user. I've been using the internet for 20 years, so I'm very good at it. I'm also an artist. I have a master's in theater design. I've been working across the world of entertainment, arts, theater, and performance. And for the last 15 to 20 years, I've been working in specifically looking at how technology and performance can work together.
Thank you. Great, Alina and Tupac. So today's webinar will explore how AI and XR are redefining creative expression. It will be an open discussion, but to spark the conversation, here are some thought-provoking questions for our speakers. Can AI become an artist co-creator? How are these technologies changing the nature of creative process? Will those technologies democratize high-level tools for everyone? And looking beyond, what is the most transformative high-impact application that XR and AI can have on storytelling? And with that, let's get started. Since we have a lady among us today, among our great speakers. So Alina, I'll give a floor to you to kickstart the discussion.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ivana. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting questions here. But the one that was most interesting for me are thinking about how XR and AI are changing the creative process. And I think when you had asked me to begin the introduction, I started thinking about the fact that even though they're big words, XR and AR are inherently just tools. And so tools fundamentally shape the work that we do. And that's in the same way that a canvas, the size and type of a canvas or the paints that you're working with, they will define your work. So yeah, I mean, I see myself as a multisensory storyteller that works across different mediums, including XR. But my fundamental goal is to use my medium to get my story told. And so, as a storyteller, you think of, okay, how do you get the audience to connect not just to the words, but to the emotion and the sentiment, and that how do you get them to connect to something that's deeper, that's at the very root of something, because to me, that's really what creative expression is about. And then I also see creative expression as something that's really specific. To me, it's kind of living with a story, giving it space to evolve, and then finding a canvas and a form for the expression. And that's maybe very different than some of the starting points. If you start with XR or if you start with AI, or you're starting with that tool at the very beginning of the creative process, I see this as a way of limiting yourself because the story that you're telling is inherently shaped by the tool. I'm not saying that's bad, but to me, that's a choice, and it has to be a really conscious choice. And so it's important to understand that how it's going to affect your narrative in the form of expression. And yeah, I mean, basically, I see it very important to learn how to use a variety of tools and canvases, so that you can really understand what types of creative expression are possible and then what you want to achieve. Um, Yeah, and I guess just to kind of end on the little introduction, I mean, I also had the wonderful opportunity to collaborate on Traction, which I think Mikel had also mentioned. Um, and this was a really beautiful project that was all about supporting the artistic co-creation process with opera. And so what came out of the project were all of these beautiful co-created pieces that included this full stage opera at the Liceo Opera House in Barcelona, that was co-created by the Raval, which is a poor neighborhood around the opera house. It also resulted in a VR opera co-created by the people of rural Ireland. And it was so interesting because it was very much the mediums of those works fundamentally affected the process. And those processes were lengthy, but the results were really deep and they were touching because there was a specificity to the story. And I guess the question that comes to me is, I wonder if AI was involved in the co-creation process, how differently that process would have been. And I really wonder, as we start talking about these tools, like how much, like are we giving enough space to the incubation period of creation? Because to me that's so important. And then there's all these, I mean, XR and AI are very different, so it's kind of hard to put them in the same bucket. But yeah, it's important to give space to things, and then it's very easy to sort of cut corners with tools like AI. So yeah, just a starting point. Yeah, love to hear what you guys think.
Mikel?
Yeah. Thanks for that. If I may, I find it very, very interesting, and I've been also thinking about this role of the AI as the co-creator, and what we did in Traction and the co-creation process, and so on. Indeed, uh, if you are able to go to co-art.eu, you can find some of the examples and resources and the co-creation operas that we did, and Alina mentioned, and also the tools that we created. I think there you can find, among others, a book that Francois wrote, and it's based on the principles of the co-creation, and how important it is to find a balance and to share the power between the different people involved in a co-creation process. So I was wondering how AI could become one of these elements of the co-creation process. So I think there is a potential there, a big potential to be one more element of the co-creation, probably not the most relevant, or but not also the least relevant, just one more element. But of course, to have this potential and to have these opportunities, there are a lot of things that we need to manage, because there are also risks and potential problems there, as in the same way that there could be risks in a co-creation with different people. If, for example, I don't know, the artists that are working with the non-professional artists, let's say, try to keep all the power and so on, and to conduct the co-creation process towards a very specific place. So in the same way that we need to balance the power and the effort from the people, I think that the AI should be also not a black box, and it should have clear rules and be trustworthy, and be something that can create this trust, in the same way that within people in a co-creation process, we build this trust, and if there is no trust, we don't work. We need to trust also in what is behind the technology, and that's a difficult a difficult issue at the moment, because most of the AI technology tools, or I don't know most, but a lot of them at least, are controlled by very specific stakeholders, let's say, or multinationals or organizations. And some of the ways of working are, at least there is controversy about how much I can trust in the data I share there, and in how I use them, and so on. So I believe that for AMPLIFY, and I believe also for TRANSMIXR, it is important to create a technology, but to be able to share that technology in an open source way, in a way that it will be useful and so on for the cultural and creative industries, but also, let's say, a trustable technology. People that feel comfortable using that technology, and they know the boundaries, and they know what they are doing for, and they can really trust behind it. And that's why it is important, I think Elena mentioned, to create the tools, but even more important, to be human-centric, and to be human trustable tools. And if that happens, I think that AI really can become one more element of this co-creation process, of a co-design process, and can help in inspiration, and can help in really going beyond the well, what it is achievable for a group that doesn't have those elements. But I think that's the point I wanted to mention, to make it happen in a way that it's aligned with the values that we really want to provide for the digital tools.
I I find it really interesting because, and I've spoken at length about this, and it's I wrote my dissertation about Leonardo da Vinci and the fact that he didn't exist the way that we think he existed. When you put the timeline together, you realize that even with cars and planes, it would be impossible to do a lot of the things that he did. So for me, he's the original studio, yeah, and he's the original person who understood how other people within your studio could actually help you create. And so suddenly I came with this realization that AI is exactly the same thing, is the elements and the parts and the assistants that can come into it in order to help create and generate, but they're not the original generator of things. At the same time, I've been writing a manifesto through TRANSMIXR, grabbing from Lars von Trier's Dogma 95 and using it as Dogma AI and almost citing a series of elements to use. It doesn't mean it's the correct way of using it. It doesn't mean it's the only way of using it, but it's a way of using it. And a lot of it has to do with the imperfections that come from AI. And at the same time, with the idea that everything is human generated or human processed original, and then allowing the machine to have its part in the same way that I would have somebody else that I tell them, draw me a tree, and they will make that tree. It might not be perfect, but at least I can start from somewhere and use that as the intersection in order to begin the process.
I think I'm more worried about this. I recently used AI to generate a couple of images on my website, and when I see those images among the other images which have come from, which are photographs mostly by me, sometimes by people I know of work, those images stand out very clearly as being alien. They look like stills from Hollywood movies. They don't look like anything that I have a real connection with. So one of the, I mean, picking up on Alina's comparison with this technology as a medium like paint. Even paint is not neutral. It has cultural resonances and implications and assumptions behind it. But that's very clear to me with AI. Mikel has talked about who is behind the creation, both corporately and individually, the culture, the people who are behind it, but also where AI is sourcing its inspiration comes from quite a narrow experience of the world. The internet is growing and enriching, but it is still not the world. It is only a part of the world, an image of the world, a representation of the world. And so it seems to me that one of the reason for my interest in being involved in AMPLIFY and previously in Traction is this technology is coming. We can't do anything to stop it. We might be able to do something to contribute to shaping it, to making it more trustworthy, as Mikel has said. And I'll just finish by saying one of the ways in which it can become more trustworthy is that we are clear when it's being used. So it's audiences, readers, viewers, consumers of the material should be able to understand clearly where the source material has come from. Has it come from human beings, whether in co-creation or individually, or has it come from machine learning and production? Because I think we need to know who is speaking to us, as it were.
I mean, the one issue that I see on all this, though, is as we've spoken before, is the biggest heist of data and imagination and creation in the history of the world being done in front of our eyes, and our government's not doing anything about it. And that has a big correlation to what you're saying, Francois. It's at the end of the day, suddenly I know I'm in every single model. I've checked, I've asked, a lot of my work is there, a lot of my music is there, a lot of my paintings are there, a lot of my writing is there. Yeah. and yet, nobody's doing anything about it. But then it becomes a thing of, well, it's I always feel like it's steroids, right? In case of like the Tour de France, where everybody's going, well, everyone's doing steroids, so I might as well do them because I don't know if the guy right next to me is not cheating. Yeah. And so then the question becomes, do you use these tools as an element of your creation because you are using the power and the imagination of thousands of people that have come before you? Or are you willing to go at it straight out and not use any of these things, in that way?
Yeah, but it is interesting. I liked very much the Hollywood style pictures that you described, because it is true that on the one hand, I mean, all these tools enable or lower the barrier to access that. For example, I probably wouldn't have capabilities to have a great photo or to create a web design or a logo for something, because I don't have that artistic capabilities. And with these tools, I'm able to create an image to enhance my blog post with something, or a logo for whatever the brand I am doing, and so on. So it is true that it's lowering the barriers and making it access to capabilities that weren't possible before. And I'm imagining also, for example, I like music, and I used to have an amateur music band. And when I was young, it was very difficult to produce music. I mean, you needed to go to a music studio and to record there and so on. And now you can do your own studio at home and do the recording. And if you have just some equipment and so on. So it's the same with AI. I mean, with generative AI, with a lot of AI-driven technologies, you can now access and have good enough things to that you wouldn't be able to do it in another way. But it is true, and more or less another analogy like the Hollywood style pictures would be that you lose the uniqueness of some of the creative values, and everything is much more homogeneous and so on. And it's like visiting different city centers or around Europe, and seeing that in the main street you find always the same shops here and there now, instead of being unique and having that identity. So you have lower barriers, much more access, but you lose the uniqueness, and everything is very similar in a sense. And because they are all inspired in major data sets, like could be Hollywood films or this kind of images and so on. And this is a big bias for the creative part, I would say.
Yeah. I think, Mikel, to add on to that, I think the way that I see it is that the most important thing is to have some sense of what you're trying to create, and to be really specific about to have your own vision as an artist. Because I think the challenge is, AI is a tool, it can add, but then if you don't know what your vision is, then that's when I think you end up with something that's generic. And the problem is that, yeah, to me, it really comes down to the core. It's not about the technology, it's about the idea. Um, it's about what you're trying to say. What if you're trying to create a certain form of expression, certainly, yeah, you can get help with that, but why are you putting this thing in the world? And if you don't know why, then that's when something feels really generic to me.
Yeah, I think you're talking, Alina, about the classic danger of technology, which is it offers power without responsibility. I was thinking, as everyone was speaking, the beginning of my working life in the late 1970s, early 1980s in the community arts movement, we talked about putting the means of cultural production into the hands of everyone. In the last 40 years, that has happened. I mean, not in the way that we anticipated at all in the 1980s, but that has happened by the creation of technology, as Mikel has said. You can now, musicians are now no longer dependent on a record company to be able to record an album and go into a studio with the costs involved. You can do that in your bedroom at home. You can make video on your mobile phone. Two things about that. One is, of course, there are still people who are excluded from that because they don't have access to that technology. But it seems to me that we're also at a tipping point where what we've done so far with the technology has been to give people access to the means of production, but they still needed to, as Alina has said, they still needed to know what they wanted to say. I've described the making of art as an act in the world. It's creative because it changes the world. And so as an artist, you have that responsibility for your acts in the world, for your speech, as it were, for what you will do in the world. Now the technology is on the threshold or over the threshold of being able to do that work for the artist without the artist having to take responsibility or to imagine anything. You know, from the student who can turn in an essay on the Romantic poets or on a scientific subject without having to do the research, but simply use AI to generate that stuff. The danger is not only the act without consciousness or responsibility. It's also, as I've suggested, that what we end up with is a speech, an expression without character. That is simply the amalgam of a kind of average of what has already been said and done and presented in the world, and that the end result of that is that we fall into a kind of creative stasis where nothing moves forward anymore.
But that then drives a question, right? Which is, and this is something that happened to me when I was 19 years old. And I walked into my photography class, and my professor, Father Flecky, it was, for me, it was a needed class as an artist major. For other people, it was an elective. Yeah. And he went and asked everybody to grab the camera, put it in their face, and take a picture. And he said, "Congratulations, you are now an artist." And I got so mad at him because I was like, no, they're not. They're not an artist. They're just people that want to create, but that's a very different story. Being an artist is an entire life choice of things and the way that you think, right? Move 25 years later in my life, I am working in a neuroscience space, and I have all these neuroscientists who think that because they can replicate a tutorial of Touch Designer, that they are now artists and that they can go into AI and make something, and that makes them an artist. Yeah. And so I did something with which I was not proud, but I thought it was quite funny, which is I read a book in neuroscience. And so then I grabbed a coat lab and I walked into the Champalimaud Foundation and I said, I am now a neuroscientist. And they looked at me like, no, you're not, because you haven't done all the studying and all the things that we needed to do. And I said, it's exactly the same thing. You haven't gone through all the things that I needed to go through and all the understandings and all the philosophy and all the other elements that make me an artist. You know, I have the same amount of studying and the same amount of time spent creating what I do than for you to just, by reading a book or reading a tutorial, claiming to be an artist. And I think that that's the biggest issue. People think that just because they can make something in AI and retouch it or do whatever, that makes them an artist. So, you know, it's like I studied philosophy and religion when I was at school, and a lot of the way that I think about the craft that I do is embedded in that. And so I think that this goes beyond just what the AI is, but it's like the side of philosophy and the way and the thinking and the deep thinking that actually understands and complements what you're trying to do and gives it a basis on what makes you an artist and what AI actually brings into the conversation of your craft.
It seems to me, Tupac, that what you're saying could be made even more explicit. I love that framing. And then the question for me then begs, okay, on one hand, we have this ability um, to engage in creative expression in a way that we hadn't been able to before in different mediums. Um, and so can we create something that gives framing to how AI can participate in a meaningful way that doesn't rob you of your humanity, and that actually can enhance the process of learning rather than taking away from the like rather than sort of demeaning the idea of art or creation, that can actually help you grow as an artist. Because I think the thing that I worry about, and I don't like using AI, I'm at least in this point in time, is that every time I mean I've used it some, and it gives me these really beautiful results for something I didn't put very much effort in. And there's a feeling of fakeness. There's a feeling like, well, I didn't put the effort into really shaping this thing. Um, and then the fear for me is that, and I think this I've seen with writing, with summarizing, as a researcher too, when we do a lot of UX qualitative research, you interview a lot of people, and then you do some in-depth analysis. You try to understand how do we synthesize everything that we got, and so that we can turn it into art or research, whatever that is. Then it can become bland. Then when I don't feel like still don't feel like I have a clear understanding of what happened, or the same. It's the same parallel between the creative process. But can we have tools that can help us grow rather than we stop being able to do the things that we were originally able to do? It's this there's some anecdotes also about, now that we have GPS, there's a lot of, like, historically, there have been indigenous tribes that have really good wayfinding. So there's a lot of, like, skills that we've lost. And I worry that also is going to happen. We're going to lose the ability to really write and think and synthesize and create. And then that's what is going to contribute us to losing our humanity.
Some of this goes right back to dilemmas that humanity has always had with new technologies. Socrates worried greatly about the development of writing, because he believed that human beings would lose the capacity to remember things. So Socrates wrote nothing. Everything we have of Socrates is only what Plato wrote. So there is a human temptation to laziness, to the shortcut, to the quick solution. So when Alina talks about not feeling that she's put the effort into something, that's to my view, an admirable feeling, but not everybody is worried about that, and the quick solution, the easy solution, is always tempting. But I want to pick up something Tupac said about being an artist and what being an artist is. I have always resisted the idea that being an artist was a, a kind of existential condition. I think it's an act in the world which everyone is able to do, and the technology has made, by giving us the means of production, by making the means of production more accessible, has made that act easier in some respects. But for me, the interesting question is not whether someone is an artist, it's whether they're a good artist or not, whether the art they have made is meaningful, enriching, and so on. And perhaps where the parallel I often find myself coming back to is the early years of cinema, when with this new technology, human beings were having to discover what they could do with cinema, and also what the language of cinema was, what the difference between good cinema and bad cinema might be. And it took time. So perhaps one of the things that we need to do, that humanity will do, is to gradually work out what the difference between good AI and bad AI is, between how good uses of AI and bad uses of AI are, what we should admire and what we should not admire, as we gradually discover the grammar of this new language that the technology is offering us.
A few years ago, about 18 months ago, I was having a conversation with one of the guys in the studio, and he said, what if I prompt something and I get the right image, exact image that I want? And I said, if you do, you go straight to the lottery and you buy a ticket, because chances are you're one of the few ones that will ever do, right? And then I was like, well, what if I wrote an essay that describes, like, if you write a Tolkien essay in which you're describing every single element of your image to the model, more than likely you are going to get that image that you want. But it's no different than me explaining to a drawer or a good graphic designer the image that I want. But at the end of the day, that piece of art is not the image that you've created, is the essay that you've written in order to create the image that you have. Yeah. And I think that that's when we go down to it, it's the essence of what we're trying to make. I think that all these tools are fantastic in many ways, and they are a disgrace in many others. Yeah. We haven't even talked about the ecological impact that all of this have within the world, and the different types of models that we could use as humans, by just using something like Comfy UI. So suddenly everything is being done in your computer. You're not doing anything up there, like things like that. But that's a completely different topic of a talk. But I think that when you use the tools as a tool, as a helper, as an assistant to assist the idea of what you're bringing, then you allow that humanity to enter the technology. When you do something and you just put it, and then that's the thing that you put to the rest of the world, where there is no human interaction, it's all done by the black box, then at that moment, that's when you're using the humanity within the technology.
Yeah, if I may, probably less conceptual or philosophical, but I would like to share the examples of the pilots that we are doing in AMPLIFY, because that was one of our main concerns, or thing that we want to have clear is what is the purpose that the technology that we are creating is bringing to each one of the pilots. I mean, what is the reason? And probably could be what is the essay of the technology that we want to create for each one of the pilots, because that's the really important thing. I mean, to have a purpose that is aligned with the values and the ways of working, and that supports that organization, that support the cultural and creative industries in general on a specific purpose, and in a correct way, and in a way that is trustable and understandable. And for example, we are imagining how technology can enable musicians in remote locations to learn music together, to create music together. We are working in Scotland with an organization, Fashion and Guile, that they are in the roots of Gaelic and Gaelic instruments and Gaelic culture, creating a community of young people, mainly adolescents, that are learning traditional instruments, traditional music, and so on. And they are in a very particular area, which is very, rural. There are different islands, and it's not easy to move from one to another. And even though they have sometimes the possibility of being physically together in the same place to play together and to learn music, they want technology to enable them to create and to play and to learn music together in real time. So, for example, there is a lot of potential there for technology-driven, AI-driven tools, like creating a kind of audiovisual auto-produced system that selects the camera according to the music, according to what I see in the video, and so on, but always with that purpose of creating this community and creating this environment that will support those communities, the ability to play together and to be together, extending the real possibilities of being together physically. Or, for example, what we are doing in Portugal, where CPL, a very small organization, have been doing concerts for babies for so many years, where I've had the pleasure to be there, and they have very good musicians surrounded by babies and the families together with the babies, and they play for those babies, understanding what they are doing, the movements of the babies, the mood of the babies, and so on. And they do in a very natural way, in a very artistic way, because that's what they've been doing for so many years. But with Amplify, they want to have technological tools that will support those musicians to know more about the hints of the babies, because maybe they are looking for one baby and there's something happening in a place that they are not looking at, or maybe because the technology identifies some hints that are useful for them to really conduct the music and how the concert is doing, because they are sometimes doing improvisation and so on according to the movements of the babies and so on. So those kind of things, if you have a clear purpose, defining the essay, as Tupac was saying, about what's the role of the technologies, which is the aspect that I'm going to solve. And if I provide something which is transparent, which is trustworthy, I think the magic of creating the essay and creating this human-centric and co-design tool and make it available and so on, there is a value there. And not intrinsically because of the AI generated something, but because it's useful for a specific purpose that we all define, and the tool is just one more element of this of this purpose and this co-design process.
I think the point you make is really important. Another reason for being involved in these projects like Traction, Amplify, TRANSMIXR, and so on, is to look at ways in which human beings can co-design, co-create, cooperate, can be in community. At the moment, another concern I have about the technology is that it has both come from and reflects the increasing individualization of our culture in the last 40, 50 years. Because on a very practical level, first, the drawing of our eyes to screens instead of to each other, and now in XR experiences, the relative isolation of the viewer in an XR experience, which is very powerful, but in which they are generally alone, and finding ways of building connection between people, of enabling them to cooperate and to be together, and to experience the social connection of community in the new technology, so that it, rather than isolating us, which I think it has been its tendency, or fragmenting us, polarizing us, that we find ways in which it can actually help us to create those common bonds together. I think this is really important, and another aspect of what the projects are trying to contribute to shaping the development of the technology.
I've noticed a question in the chat that's come up a couple times. Maybe this is something that we could also talk about, because I think we've also been talking quite a lot about AI, and this is very much about AI and XR. So I guess the question in the chat was, how can creators design multi-user XR experiences that genuinely foster collaboration, shared emotional resonance, and a sense of collective presence rather than being parallel individual experiences? And I think that kind of goes into what you were saying, Francois.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. In that sense, for example, I think that one of the aspects that Amplify is exploring, but us Vicomtech as researchers in our last years through Amplify and other research projects, it's about how to use immersive technology in a way that really connects or fosters interactions between people that are farther than just let's say massive interactions or things like, I mean, cold interactions or distant interactions, but something that will be really rewarding for the people. So, for example, at Vicomtech, we've done research in eating together in a way that eating is a very social and specific aspect that has a lot of rituals and social components. So being together while eating, if you are not in the same place and feeling really the presence of the other people, like it was really in front of you, eating with you, thanks to immersive technologies, it's a very nice territory to explore and to research and immersive technologies. And somehow it's also applicable in the research that we are doing in Amplify. For example, as they did for Traction, the Liceu Opera House is co-creating a new composition for a new co-created opera that will be performed in 2027. And they are doing that instead of with the Raval neighborhood, as they did in Traction, they are doing with the whole district, the San Andreu district, which is a bit far away from the Liceo. I mean, they are not in the same place, and you need to take the metro and travel like for 20 or 25 minutes to go there. So the theater and the district are not in the same place, but they are all communities working in the same aspects. So we want to create in an immersive experience the way of knowing more about the stories behind the libretto of that opera and discovering the different elements, the historical elements, the voices of the people that are bringing or that are present in this opera co-creation. So we want in this immersive experience not just something that will be satisfying and good to see for the audience, but also a space where you really can connect with the voices that are telling that story, with other members of the community, so you can in real time be together, some of you, two people or more, being and knowing the story at the same time and interacting with the voices of the experience. So really enabling rewarding experiences and meaningful interactions in that kind of experiences is something that we are looking for in the research that we are doing in the different pilots of Amplify.
I would also add on to that for the TRANSMIXR project. We're looking at that in a very different way, and I think it's always really interesting to think about this question and what the range of possibilities are. So for us, so for the TRANSMIXR project, we're working with social VR, and the idea of creating experiences where people can share space either in the same room or across different rooms or across different countries. So for instance, we created a game called the Space Archivists, and that was very a collaborative game experience for two people in VR, but those two people could be next to each other, or they could be in different countries. And what we're looking at right now is having created that game, we've run some tests. What is the emotional resonance that's coming out? I mean, how connected do people feel when they're sharing a virtual space together?
I mean, now we enter a completely different realm, right? Which is the conceptual idea of what is the space, what is a locality. We enter an entire idea of avatars and our second personas, or the reality of who we are in those spaces and who are as we're collaborating in those spaces. I think that when we look originally at social VR, we were trying to find a way of not having isolated experiences. Although sometimes I think that the isolated experience is actually a better experience than a collective experience. And in many times it has to do more with the technology and the issues with the technology than it does with the actual experience. Some things are nicer to be, to be done on your own. Think about how you live most of your life. You're not constantly with people. That's just the way that we've gathered now. You do most of your life on your own. We don't do it as a society. That's just the reality of who we are right now. Yeah. And so you also have to, in my head, understand how you're trying to create something that potentially is social in an environment in which we're not socially active. And so that almost counteracts the way that we behave as humans. And so, I think that the interactions that we create within social XR environments have to follow that same path in the way that we behave as humans. In the same way that when you are in a VR experience, you're not looking left and right like a bloody dog that has looking for something. No, you live in 90 or to 120 field of view. That's where you live. Something happens, you turn, is that more interesting? No, you come back. But you're not the whole time looking like that, because that's just not the way that we live. Yeah. And so I think that when we start creating these interactions, we have to be conscious about the way that we behave as humans, because many of these things actually fail because we think, oh, we're going to make it social because of this, and that. It's like, actually, yeah, but that's not the way that we do. That's not the way that we live. And we need to understand those things in order to create correctly for social environments and for social XR and multiplayer and that kind of thing, and not just create multiplayer for the sake of making multiplayer.
I was thinking as you were speaking, I've always thought that the original virtual reality is storytelling. You listen to a story and you are taken into another world, which can be as vivid as anything that you actually experience directly. And a storyteller can be telling a story to a group of people, each of whom is in a different virtual reality, because each of them is imagining what they're hearing from the storyteller, filtered through their own experiences, through their own culture, their own reality. And so, given how old this is, storytelling, I mean, from the earliest time of human beings sitting around a fire, entertaining each other with their own imaginations. It may be that we should accept that we are riding a tide of change that is the tide on which human beings always live. The world is changing about us, and we will find ways of riding the tide in the direction we want to go, as we tend to do as a species. But we don't control that tide. We don't control what is happening with technology now, with AI and with XR, but we may be able to influence the tide and to ride it more skillfully, which is what I think our projects are trying to contribute to.
Yeah, and there's almost an element of, and by the way, I'm not against multiplayer or social VR, by the way, just to put it out there. Obviously I do enjoy them. I enjoy going to the theater, I enjoy going to shows, I enjoy going to concerts. I enjoy those public spaces, but those public spaces also have set of rules that we've created, or at least we've signed this non-existing contract that we all sign when we walk into a theater, and we all agree that we are now in Verona and we're seeing the 16th century story about two young lovers called Romeo and Juliet. It's a contract that we signed without ever acknowledging it, but we all agree upon it. And so I think a lot of the interactions that we have to be based on that way, about what are these social contracts, what are these elements that we're making that allow us to create for that audience. I see many pieces in XR that don't work. I see a lot of this very famous now multi-projector spaces that I don't think work. That it's just because, oh, we put a bunch of images and projectors and now you must love them and this is immersive, and it's like, well, no, that's not immersive. Oh, but it's collective. Well, it's not collective, it's just a bunch of images at the same time. So I think that's when we start thinking about the creativity and the elements and the storytelling, and something I speak a lot about, which is story keeping. And story keeping is all about trimming the fat of things that are not needed in a story, and putting your ego aside and being able to trim those things to serve the story, not to serve your ego. And I think in a lot of the things that we see in XR, it's a service to the ego, not a service to the story.
Well, but that also makes sense because it takes so much time to make things that once you've created all of the elements, then I mean, yeah, it's very hard to go back.
I think it's not that it's hard. It's just, once again, it's your ego, because you go, oh my God, I spent 6 days making this level or making this assets and whatever it is. And then you're like, oh, I don't want to feel like that's wasted. It's like, no, but if we were making a play and that piece of prop or that element of set did not serve the story, the director would just cut it and throw it away. So what makes it more important that you made it in 3D or you made it in a DC or whatever it is? What gives it more importance to that? And it's like, no, that's the whole point of editing, for example, and making sure that the story's tight, and making sure that when I think about XR experiences, right? One of the funniest things about it is every single XR person tells you about storytelling, but most of the times the storytelling tends to be quite shite, because people actually don't pull you through the normal elements. And it's like they haven't read Joseph Campbell. They haven't read, the ideas of the Romans and Aristotle and the Greeks and all that kind of thing. Like, there are so many things that exist in the way that we tell stories. And we think that just because we're putting in a new technology, that those things don't apply. Don't get me wrong, we can break them, but you need to have the knowledge of how these rules apply for natural storytelling in order to be able to break them within the technology that you're using.
Mm.
Yeah. I do wonder though if I mean, it's a really good point, but I also wonder if in this idea of story keeping and the challenges of doing that when you're investing so much effort into creating XR models, is there something that AI can help support in that way? Like, if the whole point is that you can make something quite quickly, then that can be a mock-up, and then it would be easier to throw away.
Well, I guess that we'll reach a point where our AI can produce immersive experiences the way that it can currently produce essays or images.
There are already tools about making, you give it an image, and then out of that image, you start getting worlds being made in real time. Like that's something that is happening right now. There's plenty of examples into that. But I think that, I'll go back to it. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you have to. Yeah. And so, for example, I'm very good at making things in XR in gray boxes. Yeah. I'm not giving it an idea. It's just I'm saying, I think I need something here. I need something there. If you think about Eugenio Caballero, for example, who's a production designer of Roma and the Pan's Labyrinth, and when he begins to design sets, he actually uses watercolor to block things. He doesn't tell you what those things are. He's just trying to understand what things need to be like and what are the shapes that he's trying to work with. And then he starts thinking, okay, that should be a bookcase, that should be this, that should be that. Yeah. And so there's a reason, for example, in the studio that everyone has a notepad right next to their computer, and no one's allowed to do anything in their computer until they've drawn it. You draw it first, even if it sticks. You draw it first, and then you bring it in, because the fact of drawing allows you to have a three-dimensionality and understand what is it that you're trying to make. And therefore, you're not limited by your knowledge of the software that you're using, but actually you are limited technically by what you can think about that you're trying to make. Yeah. And so we go back to this idea, Alina, of these are tools. These are things that allow us to do different elements and become very good and be very creative, but they are tools. And it's actually up to our imagination in the way that we used, the concept that just because you can put an image and create a 3D world and that makes it storytelling is absolutely bogus, because you don't control what the black box is doing on the other side in order to create those worlds. And the reason for those worlds to exist and the way that they exist. Like if you go to any immersive theater, when you go see Punch Drunk or things like that, like the fact that you can open cabinets and do this and everything that you're doing is tied to the story. And there's a reason to exist. Yeah. You're not going to find a BB gun in somewhere where it's meant to be a priest. Or if there is, then you're like, okay, so what's the reason for the BB gun? Like all these things need to have a meaning within it in order to make it existential and why they need to exist. We go back to Chekhov. If you present the gun must be used, right? And think about how many times you are in the next experience in which they're giving you things and actually they're just there to make them look cool because actually they don't serve the story and the purpose of it. And this is where I go by story keeping. It's like, these are the things that you don't need. And yet you keep putting them in there because it's cool.
Yeah. And I think just to respond to that, I think just in the TRANSMIXR project, we've had, when we were making the Space Archivist, we're constantly going back and forth with the studio because a lot of the elements that they had created looked cool, but we kept asking, yeah, but how is this related to the story? And it actually contradicted the story, but they didn't see it. I think that's always the challenge in having the kind of the separation between story and creation is you're not seeing each other's perspective.
Yeah, again, it's back to the parallel with the early days of filmmaking, where often they didn't know how to tell a story because they hadn't worked out the grammar of cinema.
It is, and if you want to be super crude about this, right? Cinema, it took them about 25 to 30 years to start editing. Yeah. Editing. We're not talking about anything major, just editing. Now, if you think about what I call now the third generation of VR, the first one was in the mid 80s and early 60s and that kind of thing. And I kind of lumped that together as a single generation of VR. Then you have the second generation, which is the 2014, 2015 people that got into XR experiences. And then after COVID, you have an entire new generation that's gotten into XR. Yeah. A generation who, by not their fault, are not seeing what those earlier two generations did and the mistakes that they made and how they can solve for those mistakes. Yeah. And so therefore, a lot of the things that we learned about XR and storytelling have been lost because they have been kept in a way that the new generations can actually see it. Yeah. And so I go back to this idea of the story keeping, because that's where understanding why the story needs something, why the way that you're telling the experience that you're doing needs to have these assets or needs to have this videos. So it's also asking a lot out of our brains to think so quickly about an entire new media that if you take second and third generation, it's almost 12 years old, you know. So technically it should take us another 5 to 6 years if we're trying to match cinema to come to the editing side of things, you know. But because we're bombarded with all this stimuli and we're seeing so many things done at the same time, you know, one of the reasons cinema couldn't be edited right away was because not many people were playing with it. It was expensive, you know. And now, you know, it's one of those things where it's become a lot cheaper. You know, we always discuss that by 2025 we wanted everybody to have a headset in their home, just like they have a TV. Did we achieve that? No. Why? Well, various reasons. Many of them have to be hardware related. Yeah. But if you think about the tools in order to create all these stories, we have been able to put that in every single household. You know, everyone can download Unreal Engine. Everyone can download Unity. You can go in and download Blender. You know, you can start creating things that don't. The last animation, Oscar is a guy who did it on Blender. So you have those tools, and those tools are now available. You know, so I think a lot of the people that are going to start breaking some of the ideas that we have about XR are 16, 18-year-old kids or 12-year-old kids who are currently playing with that every single day of their life in order to make things and understand storytelling in a completely different way for us.
I wonder if AI can actually help us with the process, like to reverse the idea of I give a prompt and something comes out of the prompt. What you were saying, Tupac, about a lot of new generations not having the storytelling background, the foundation with which to create. Could it be that we ask AI to give us prompts so that we can learn? Like, oh, I want to create a particular type of story. Where should I go? Should I read this passage of Joseph Campbell? Like, so that to make us better rather than to make us worse.
I think that there's definitely a way that we can go backwards and reverse engineer some of those elements. But I think that the beauty of what does XR and interesting is the fact of how your senses are overtaken by things. And the only way we understand those is by actually being in the space. Yeah. I always give this example. Does everybody remember the first shot of House of Cards? Okay. The first shot of House of Cards is it opens and you hear a dog go, yeah. And then out of focus, we see somebody coming down and runs all the way up to the front and is sitting there and is looking at the dog and is trying to look at it. And then suddenly he looks up and goes and says, I have no time for this, and kills the dog, right? Now, what was impressive about it is if you see this in a cinema, yeah, Kevin Spacey would have been over there, and you would have been to the left, to the right, at the bottom, of the top. So his eyes would have only locked to a certain percentage of the cinema. If you're seeing it at home in a television, unless you're forward, maybe the person who's on the sofa to the left, to the right, wouldn't see it in the same way. Yeah. But Netflix understood that in 2014, most of the population was watching Netflix on their phone. And when you have your phone, you're not seeing the phone from here, you're seeing the phone from here. So the moment that he looks up and locks eyes with you, it's the most intimate way of breaking that fourth wall in the way that it was being done. Yeah. And so suddenly that became an amazing, immersive way of telling a story. Yeah. And so, yes, I agree. We can reverse engineer many of these things, but what we do with XR in many occasions, if you're in a headset, you know, you are mine for the next 35 to 15 minutes. You can't look at your phone. You can't look at another person. You can't have a break of the world. You are in that world. And the way that you feel in that world, the way that you smell and the way that you touch and the way that you interact with things are completely different. And you cannot imagine them, you know. It's like you can't explain to somebody what sex is like. You can tell them, You can explain in multiple ways and read loads of prose, but you're never going to understand what sex is like. You're never going to understand what bacon tastes like, right? You can write it, but you need to have that experience. And that's the beauty about XR. It's probably one of the few mediums in which you truly live the space in which you're in.
I think this is a good note to wrap up the discussion, and maybe we can move forward to our Q&A. I have a question in the chat. So, Tupac, you actually mentioned that AI has a variety of different negative environmental impacts, but are there any positive ones related to those technologies? So AI, immersive technologies as well. So is there anything positive?
Of course, think about it, just where we are right now. Yeah. One of the things that pandemic gave us was the ability of actually making video conference a thing in which you were not badly seen from joining on a video conference. Think how many times people will be in the same room traveling from all over the world, and then suddenly it's like someone joins in from the video call and it's like, oh, I can't believe they didn't come. Like those kinds of things, right? There's a really cool tool called Spatial that we used a lot. And the idea of being able to go into one single space and having a room and being able to bring models and and everybody's in but we have the sense of presence, right? Because what we miss is the sense of presence. What we lose in these kinds of occasions is the sense of presence. The moment that you have presence, everything changes. If I turn to my right and I see you and you speak and you're coming from my right ear, I think that my brain tricks me to think that you are there. Yeah. Even though I know, even though my eyes know, even though everything around me knows that you're not there, it allows me to think and it tricks my mind to think that you are there. Yeah. And in many occasions, these are fantastic tools, being able to, I have friends who are really, really bad at drawing, right? But bad, I mean, like horrible people. But they can create 2 or 3 images on DALL-E, Midjourney, whatever you want, and then Photoshop them and make a collage out of it. And that allows me to understand something. Yeah. So if you think about people who are blind, people who are who can't hear, we're able to now find new ways that this technology can actually help you. I remember wearing Google Glass. Yeah. Many, this dates me, but wearing Google Glass and going and saying into Tesco and saying, I want Campbell's tomato soup. And it knew the layout of the supermarket to tell me, go left, go right. Yeah, start looking at the soups and saying, stick your hand out. There's so many things that these tools are amazing for, but we just need to be conscious of what we're creating and why we're creating them and for whom are we creating this.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. For example, we were samplifying the Internet Festival some days ago because one of our partners and one of our pilot is related in Italy about connecting artists and audiences and managing the interactions between and among the artists and audiences differently. And we are envisioning an immersive place where you go to a festival, where you are with your friends and with all the colleagues in the festival. And apart from having, of course, artists there physically, and maybe there could be the situation like we are together, not physically together, but together in this seminar, that there could be an artist that is in another country, in another place, but that you can put your glasses on and see the artists in the stage or in a space as they were there. And further than that, I mean, just instead of creating traditional or let's say physical formats there and going to the streaming, something like that, we want to go beyond that and create formats that wouldn't be possible there. So, for example, in the Internet Festival, we've been exploring and piloting a tool where you can, let's say, be in an immersive play with the artists and get closer to some of them visually and also according to the audio and have a different mixing, which is generated in real time for you. So you have more of that, this instrument, because you are close to there, or you see in front of this audio and on the sides according to where you are in the state. So there are a lot of possibilities, of course, in the ecological impact, because this might help situations that wouldn't be possible if it's not possible to be there physically and to travel there, but also to have formats that wouldn't be possible in a real festival, let's say, because, well, I could jump to the stage and be closer to one of the instruments, but that's not feasible for all the audience. So you could bring other kind of experiences and formats thanks to the technology.
One of the things that really annoyed me during COVID was festivals that were doing festivals, immersive festivals, like Glastonbury and things like that. And you want to know that the most annoying thing it was is being in an immersive space, being in a place that has no physics in which you can break all the rules. What did they do? They gave us physical rules. So suddenly I was stuck behind a freaking dinosaur and I couldn't see the stage. And I was like, why can't I fly? Why can I do all these other things that will be allowed because I'm allowed to break the rules of physics? And yet, as humans, we're bound by ourselves about the things and the limitations that we have, and it's those breaking those barriers and understanding that we're entering a space, and like I said before, we're entering a space in which even your digital avatar has now become an extension of who you are and how they're dressed and all these other things. Yeah. And so now we have to think about this double humanity that we have and the person who we are outside and the person that we're inside this things. And what does that do to our psyche? It's known that many people consider Travis Scott in Fortnite to be their first concert, right? Now, for me and you, it's probably like, no, your first concert is like you're physically there and the bass hits you in the gut and you get spilled with beer. That's your first concert. No, for these people, having and seeing him and moving around the spaceman and seeing Travis Scott in the way that they are moving is their first concert. So we have to understand also that way of living and that way of understanding and how generations are understanding the idea and the concept of what socially means.
Thank you. Another question from the chat. So we kind of talked about it, but do you think creators can actually become artists through the use of those tools? Or do you really think that they need to stick to?
I'm not saying nobody can become an artist and it's a closed shop for everybody. No, not at all. I've never said that. The problem is, okay, so imagine that you did images in Midjourney 1.4 and you put that as your artwork. Yeah. The moment that Midjourney went into Midjourney 2, you're screwed because if your style was Midjourney 1.4, you're never going to be able to get that again. Right. So this is what I mean is that the concept of being an artist is not just the philosophical and way of being, but it's also the fact of the tools and the elements and the craft that you've actually created for yourself,
But what about maybe you don't have the technical skills, but the way you've described it, you're still the kind of like an artist because you have the idea.
Of course, but then once again, it's the essay that you've written in order to make the image that actually makes you the artist. It's not the image that you're making. I'm a big believer that anything that gets done digitally by a black box, let's be honest, most of the models are black boxes. Unless you're working in Comfy UI and you're making your entire workflow together, you're just prompting something and you get an image back. That image needs to be treated by you as a human so that you can bring it the elements that you need to,
I think I would add on to that though that it's really knowing, like, you can have so many forms of mediums, but just recognizing again, like, what is the thing that you're trying to express? And then what are you, knowing that that each tool is just a tool, and that if you don't have access to one tool, that your form of creative expression might change, but the thing that you might want to say can remain the same. So and I think just feeling like you can work with multiple tools, to me, that's what that feeling of an artist is. It's okay, these are the tools in front of me. How do I use them to express? And then if I have a different canvas, how do I use that?
Francois might have a thought about this, but I always tell people that I'm an artist because if I don't make, my soul hurts. Like I need to create. It's not an element of, oh, not today, I don't feel like, no. It's I need to make. If I don't create, if I don't go into that space as my meditation, as my well-being, if I don't go into that space, I don't exist as a human being.
I have a general worry that we now place more importance on art and culture than it can bear. It has grown during the course of my lifetime to become both economically, socially, culturally, spiritually even, an enormous force. And it's one of the most prestigious things you can do is to be an artist in the world today. I worry that we are in danger of neglecting other sides of human experience and human life, that we are overvaluing the performative and the creative aspects of what we do. Yeah, that's just and to some extent it's striking that the new technology is so geared towards creative production rather than arguably some more productive or life-saving aspects of how we might apply it.
I would actually disagree with that. I think the problem is we tend to talk more about the creative elements, but no one's talking about drones and the war and having all these AI systems that now, because that's not something that we care about right now. This is not something that is in your public domain. I think that art and creativity are more something that as humans we think we need to have. I completely agree with you. And I think that there is a certain burden about people being creative and enjoying the arts and that kind of thing. It's like, no, go enjoy your football, go enjoy your rugby. That gives you the same release of energy that you need. But I think that one of the biggest reasons for it is we are, as a society, very illiterate. And so the moment that things become very complicated, and I need to explain to you why, and the way that neuroscience work and the way that wars work and the political side of things and the use of AI into other spaces, it becomes so boring and so difficult for people to understand that they don't care about it. Because let's be honest, you're not going to go and create an AI to kill somebody or to start a war yourself, because that's not part of your real. Yeah. But in reality, on the backside of things, yeah, there's an entire systems of AI. Listen, OpenAI and all these data centers are not happening because people want to create images and people want to create movies. That's the nice little distraction. It's actually for a whole lot of other purposes that we are completely in the dark about. But it's easy to blame things on Midjourney and DALL-E and Sora and all those kinds of things because it's copyrights, because it's things that are tangible and people can understand, very simple, because they're on a day-to-day basis. You have books, you have music, you have movies, you have images. But we don't talk about all the other places in which AI is doing. I mean, grab and just go into the EU platform and see the plethora of things that are happening in science, in research, in agriculture, in economics, in cars. Like there's an entire world that we as humans, as people who care about the arts, are more engaged with. There's Palmer Luckey was talking about how he has a contract with the US military, yeah, to send completely airplanes and drones and things that are just, they don't even have to do anything. Yeah. They're completely done with AI and they learn from it. But we don't hear about those things. Those things are not on the news.
Mm-hmm.
I always bring the cheer to the world, by the way, as you can tell. I'm like the happiest human in the world.
You're right. I mean, this is it's like an iceberg. There's an enormous amount beneath the surface that we're unaware of because we don't have, I have no knowledge of weapon systems and how they are being transformed by artificial intelligence and so on. But it's evident that that's happening.
I mean, there's always that thing, right? What moves technology forward? Military and porn. That's it. Those are your two main elements that will always move the technology forward. It's to end this in a nice note, right? Have you ever thought about how many patents are owned by illusionists and magicians? Harry Houdini had something like 65 patents by the time he died.
Wow.
But the problem is those patents are being used to make magic, even though some of them might actually cure cancer. But we have no idea, because he was using them specifically for magic and not sharing them with the rest of the world. I think
Ivana,
you're muted, Ivan.
Hear me now? Technology. Okay. So I think this is a good way to wrap up this webinar. And I think we covered a lot of interesting topics. We want to thank you all for joining us today. And of course, a big thank you to our speakers for participating. Your insights were truly, truly valuable and graphic. So we want to invite you all for our second webinar, Creative Future, Ethical Frames, on November 6th, same time, 10:30 CET. And this session will be shared and made available through both projects' YouTube channels. And once again, thank you all, and I'm wishing you a great day ahead.